Hi, my name is Emily Vogel, and I am here to talk to you about API development. So the first question that you're probably wondering is, what is an API? In short, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's a way to get and manipulate code or other programs, even possibly lower level stuff. A good example of this, kind of at a high level point of view, is Java. Java is sort of like an API to writing assembly or machine code, and more of a applications type of thing rather than programming languages. Accessing a phone camera is also an example of an API. But what we are learning today is how to make a web API, which is a little bit different than kind of the traditional definition of what an API is. So what is a web API? Usually a web API manipulates a database or files in cloud storage. And it can integrate with more complex applications like with machine learning, security, or even video games. And almost all apps, like this is very important to know, almost all apps and websites use some sort of API, and it's usually custom built. I'm listing a few examples here. Some of these might be kind of interesting to you. One of my personal favorites is This Person Does Not Exist, which uses machine learning to create random pictures of people who in fact don't exist. But there's also a couple of other ones if you're a nerd like me. There's Pokemon API. There's also NASA APIs, Spotify APIs. Even Zoom has an API you can use. So the point is that APIs are everywhere, and it's important to at least know how to use them. Maybe not write them. It depends upon where you end up going for your CS degree. But it's also important to note that there are different types of APIs. The first iteration was called SOAP, which is Simple Object Access Protocol. The one that we're learning today is called REST, which is Representational State Transfer. And the newest one that the whole idea was actually conceived by Facebook is GraphQL. So just kind of to quickly go over why you should care about this. Some courses at Towson may require you to write or use an API for group projects. A few examples that I listed or remember using them for was software engineering, web development, mobile development, and databases. Databases depends upon the teacher you have, and web dev and mobile dev are electives. But the point is that you will definitely be using an API at least at some point during your time at Towson. And it's also important to note just when you go out into the job market too, because even government agencies, which are kind of slow when developing new technologies, depending upon which government agency you go to, they do develop APIs, as evident by the NASA API. All right, so let's move on real quick to just some REST API fundamentals, so you guys kind of know where I'm coming from when we get into the demo. You all are startled with all this new information. The first thing that we need to go over real quick is HTTP methods. HTTP request methods, there's a ton of them, but these are probably going to be the 4 that you use the most when either developing or using an API. You're going to use get, which usually gets something. It could be a single kind of resource, or it could be multiple resources. Post, which usually creates something, but I've seen it used for logging in, for instance, or for a search route or something like that. There's also patch, which usually updates something. So imagine if you had a user and you wanted to update their profile, and then there's delete, which obviously deletes something. These are known as CRUD, which stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. So the second thing that you should know is status codes. These are probably some of the most common status codes that you'll use in an API. Depending upon how you write the API, your API could only use 2 of these, or it could use all of them. Just depends upon how well you want to do error handling and stuff. So for 200, that means everything is A-okay. 201 means that something was created. 204 means no content, but imagine if it's usually if you are calling a delete request. If you delete someone, then you don't expect to get any content back from the request. 400 means that something was wrong in the request that you sent up. So if you were logging in, for instance, and you forgot the password, then 400 would be returned because you were missing a password and you can't log in without it. 401 is user is not logged in. 403 is user is not authorized, which that kind of just goes down to whether or not the user has the privilege to go and do certain things on your API. Like if they were an admin, then maybe they could, I don't know, delete a whole video, for instance. But if they weren't, then they can only see the video. 404, this one is probably one that most people have heard of before because it's in a lot of programming memes, is not found. And that's where that meme kind of originates. And 500 is literally everything just messed up. Something just messed up in our API. And it wasn't anyone's fault but ours. So what should you know before learning API development? It really depends upon your language. We chose JavaScript because it requires the least amount of setup. Everyone has JavaScript installed on their computer. If you installed everything to follow along with the workshop, there's only really 3 things you have to download, one of which is optional, but highly recommended. But yeah, like in some languages, it requires you to know a little bit more advanced concepts. Like in Java, you have to know strictly what an object is in Java and also annotations. While Golang, you have to know how functional programming works and also other kind of features such as pointers. And it's also important to note that an API can really be developed in any language that you want to like any language that you prefer. It can be Python, JavaScript, Java, C++, Rust, Golang. The options are really endless. All the stuff that or all the information that is in this PowerPoint is cross-platform from languages. It's not language specific, but the demo will definitely be language specific, obviously. But there is one thing that you should kind of know before starting API development, which it's not that hard to learn, is just the JSON data structure. JSON is a type of file. It's sort of like a Word document or an image file or something like that, except for it just describes what data looks like when it's being sent or received. So the brackets that you see here are usually for arrays. What are the squiggly braces called? I'll just call them squiggly braces. They usually denotate objects of some kind. So like the first element in the orders array is an order object. And you can only store strings, numbers, and Booleans. So now that all that's done, we'll go over to the demo, and I'll also post this link in our Zoom chat too. So that way, if I'm going too fast or something in the demo, you guys can kind of refer back to this without having to ask me to like go back unless you want to. But yeah, before I do that, does anyone have any questions? I have to get chat up. Oh, also just to kind of give you guys a fun example, because I really do like this API. It again creates random images of people, and every single time you go to it, it's a new image. Sometimes the AI fails really bad, but yeah. Okay. Okay, so at this point, you should have downloaded everything that was in the requirements when I sent out the announcement. I I post or not posted them. I have them open right here in case you need a reminder. You should definitely have Node installed, and you'll know it's installed if you type in your terminal or console, depending upon your operating system. If you type this out, you'll get a number, or if you type this out, you'll get a number. You'll need to use the command line. That's very important. The next thing you'll need is Postman, which allows you to send HTTP requests and kind of configure all of that. And it's recommended that, sorry, the stupid control panel is blocking my, there we go. The last thing that you'll need to download, which is highly recommended, although you don't need it because you can use Notepad, for instance, is Visual Studio Code, or you can also use the Atom editor too. That's also a very popular text editor. But yeah, okay. Give me 1 second to, okay. Okay, so sorry, if you open up your terminal and go to wherever you want to save this project, I'm going to make a directory real quick for our demo and go into it. The first thing that you want to do is open up wherever you want to put this. You don't have to use the command line to open up Visual Studio Code. You can open it up here and then navigate to wherever it is in your file system, but just open up a directory that you want to put all of your code in. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do, I'm just going to open up a terminal. I can't pronounce words. Here is we want to init the npm package. So what we're going to do is we're going to type npm init in our folder. And we'll just call this demo. It's going to be version 1, doesn't need a description. And you can see that this package.json was created when you run the npm init command and just kind of go through all the default stuff. So if you've never worked with npm before, essentially what npm is it stands for Node Package Manager. So whenever you work with code that somebody else wrote, some people, the old practice was to download a zip file of the repo, like on GitHub or something, and then you can use that in your project. But that hasn't been the best strategy, especially when you need to quickly update versions of the packages that you're using. So like if you needed to update your MySQL connection, for instance, for a database, it's better to use a package manager like this. And usually every language has some sort of package manager, even Java. Java actually has 2. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you ever do that. Okay, so we have to do a few things in this package.json. First thing that we have to do is we're gonna add a script. called start. Now, what a script does is basically, oh, sorry, I missed that in the chat. So essentially what a script does is it allows you to run some sort of command line script by running npm whatever. So like if I ran npm run test, you can see that it outputs this error message right here. How do I get it? So you go up to the terminal tab right here. Do you kind of see it? It might be different on Windows. Yeah, Macs are kind of hard to get used to when you don't use them very often. You might not have installed, or did you run npm version like that and you got a number out? Because if you didn't get a number out, that means you don't have Node installed. Okay. Or there was a problem with your installation. Okay, going back to scripts. But yeah, that's what a script does. If you run like npm run test, it will echo out an error like this. So what we need here is a script to start our server. So what we're going to do is we're eventually going to create a source folder and then put an index.js file in it. So what I'm going to write here is node source index.js. What this will do is basically run whatever code is in index.js. Okay. The next thing that we want to do is define a type. And we're going to do common.js. This is because we're going to be doing some importing from other files. And sometimes Node is kind of finicky when it comes to that. So yeah, that's really the only reason. And then the other things that we do is actually have to install our dependencies that we need to create an Express server. So what you're going to do is you're going to run npm install --save, and then you're going to type body parser .env and express. Okay, so as you can see, it generated a package lock.json, and it also installed all these Node modules. So we can use these dependencies that we just installed. Okay, and that should be it for our initial package.json setup. Next, we are going to create a source directory and create the index.js or index.js file. Like that. Okay, so this part's going to be a little bit more heavy, so bear with me. What we're going to do is we're going to first initialize .env. So what you're going to do is you're going to type this. I can spell correctly. And then to configure it, we're going to run config. Now, I didn't go over what .env is, but what .env is it holds environment variables in your server. So essentially what I can do is you can create a .env file like this at the root of your project, and then define variables like port and give it some sort of value. And then anytime in the project after you've already configured it, you can reference process.env.port and you'll be able to get whatever this value is in here. Now, you might be wondering why we do .envs. This is because you typically want to keep things like passwords, like database passwords, a secret. So what you'll do is you'll just kind of ignore this .env file from your GitHub repo. That way your application remains secure and like keys aren't being released into production and people can hack into your server. Okay. But yeah, we'll use .env shortly after we configure Express. Okay, so now we're going to configure Express. So what we're going to do is you're going to type Express, and then you're going to say it requires, you guessed it, Express. And then what you're going to do, you're going to run this command because Express is a function. And in case you're wondering where I'm getting all this information, if you go to the npm packages, specifically like .env, Express, body parser, they usually have a very in-depth README on how to get all this set up. But you can always find this information if you just Google search it. Yeah, in case you need references, I actually have my my demo set up right behind me just so I'm not sitting here fumbling and searching everything all the time. Okay, so we're gonna start by making an initial base route for our application. So what we're going to do is we're gonna type, now that we've defined app.get, and then just a slash, function, which takes a request, a response, and what we're going to do is we're just going to say res.send hello world, or it could be whatever you want. You can send like whatever string that you want. I'm just going to use hello world because the example that I wrote was very long. And then the last thing that we need to actually have an up and running Express API is app.listen, and then you want to give it a port number. So that comes into play with the .env file that we made. But you can also use whatever whatever port number that you want. You can manually define it like so, or you can use the process.env port, or you can use both. But we're also just going to pass in a quick function to this too. It shouldn't take anything. And all we're going to do is just console.log like started, just so we know when the API is actually started. Okay. Is everyone following along? Am I going too fast before I go forward with testing and stuff? Okay. Okay, so I am going to start up Postman now. That's the other thing I had you guys download. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our demo and just do npm run start. And if it started correctly, we should see that started is now ran, which is what we console logged right here. So what we should be able to do is go to our Postman and select the GET request from here, and then type http:/localhost 3000. And we get back hello world. which is the route that we just made. In case you're wondering what localhost is, that's just your local computer. The port that we gave was the 3000 port. People usually use localhost and port if you're developing locally, like if you have a database, like a SQL database, there's usually a localhost with a port to it. But yeah, okay, so yeah, we have our first route. But there's a couple other things that we want to do because obviously we only have this get route right here, which isn't very, this app's good, but we need more data to it, right? Who wants just to get like hello world from a get request? And that's all the API does. So what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a router. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another folder within the source directory called routers. And the first one that I'm going to create is the status router. Now, what routers do is basically delegate these routes like this one into different files. That way you can separate them by different files so you don't have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of routes in the same file, just to keep your code clean. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of demonstrate the various routes that you can, or not various routes, the various statuses you can send in this, and then we'll go into kind of a mock database example. So what we're going to do is we're also going to call express like we did in the index.js file. But instead of calling app, what we're going to do is we're going to create a router like so and call .router. So this router kind of acts as like a proxy for app. So what we can do is we can use the same command. So we can say router, if I can spell correctly, router.get. And then I'm just going to say 200. We'll just go through each one real quick. And I'm also going to, I'm also just going to not type out request and response just to save time. And then we can just send a status of 200. Same thing with 201. And then I'll only go through one more example so you guys kind of get the idea. We'll do 400. Actually, we'll do 404. Why not? Okay, so we're going to save. We're going to, it's Control-C on, I think, Mac. I think it's also Control-C on Windows to stop your current server. And then we're going to run the start command again. Now, it is important to note that there is a package that you can install called nodemon that will automatically restart. But that just seemed kind of a little bit too much setup for a small workshop like this. And then what we can do is run the same thing again. Oh wait, I forgot something. I'm sorry. We're gonna have to first export the router. How we do that is we just type module.exports and we just give it the router. Sorry about that. And then we go back to our index or our index file, and we have to get the router and tell the app to use it, because Express doesn't quite know where like routers are unless you tell it to, like tell it where it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a router. We're going to call this status router. And we're going to require it the same way, but we're going to go into routers and access it like this. This is a file path in case nobody has seen this before. And then we're just going to tell the app to use our router, like so. Okay, and then now you should be able to go here, go to status 200, and then you can see that it's it's okay. It's created and it's not found. Okay. So that covers status codes, but now we want to get more into the HTTP methods. We've covered GET, but GET's the only one that we covered. There's still 3 other ones that are pretty common that we haven't done yet. So the first thing that I'll actually do before we start coding that router is I'm going to create a new folder called mock database. And essentially what this is it's a mock database. But if you wanted to change out this mock database for something like an actual database like MongoDB or MySQL, you could easily just change the code in here and download the correct packages and then interface it with that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create the heroes database file. I personally don't like the to-dos. That's like, they're like the to-dos data structure because it's so overused. And I wanted to make this a little bit more interesting. So instead, we're gonna be saving heroes like I don't know, you can think of it like D&D heroes or Cyberpunk or however you want to think about it. Okay, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define an array, which in JavaScript, you just define it like this, simple. And it's also important to note this is a dynamic array, which means you don't have to set up size limits and stuff. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get heroes. So we're going to create a function called getHeroes. And this might be kind of boring, but we kind of need this to code our router. We're also going to need to get an individual hero with an ID. What we're going to do is we're going to return the hero that that matches hero.id is equal to ID. And then create hero, also simple. We're just going to do heroes.push hero. Then we're going to update a hero to what we're going to do is we're going to get the index first of the heroes array and then find index. and then return hero ID, which is equal to our ID. Then from that index, we're just going to first check if it exists. If our hero does exist, then we are going to set the hero, like so. And then lastly, we're going to use the same function that we defined up here. To delete a hero. An ID. And then we have a function called splice, which simply just deletes a index number. And then as we did with our router, we have to export these functions. So we're going to type module.exports, and then we're going to give it get hero, get heroes, create hero, update hero. I know how to delete heroes here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I know JavaScript's kind of weird if you haven't looked at it before, but is there any questions from this that anyone wants me to talk about? The whole idea of callback functions like this can be a very weird concept to wrap your head around. So yeah, especially if you've only like encountered this once or like just now. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. So now that we have our heroes DB all set up and everything, we can now make our router. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another file like we did before. We're going to call it hero router. And just like our status router here, we're going to set up it initially like this. And then, of course, export it. That. Yeah, it's just that. Okay. And then we're going to define our routes here. Okay, so obviously we need a get method. So we're going to call router.get. And then again, a slash. We're going to take a function, request, response. And then we want to call our heroes database. But we haven't, again, imported our functions. So we need to do that at the top of this file. That's it, right? No, we also need update hero. And then of course we are importing it from mock database, and then our heroes DB. Okay, so we have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that this route gets all of our heroes. So what we're going to do is we're going to say our response, we're going to send our get heroes. And for our individual hero, we want to get an ID hero from our database with the ID. Now you might be wondering how we're going to get this ID, because we can't just reference ID like this, unfortunately. So what we have to do is we have to actually go into the request itself. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to call request.params and then whatever it's called. Parameters refers to things within the route like this. There's also query parameters. If you've ever seen like the question mark and then some sort of value plus, and then an equal sign, that would be a query parameter. And we would define this ID to, or we would define whatever value this is according to what it's defined here. So if we had like hero ID here, we would say hero ID instead. Okay. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do router.post, which remember creates a resource. Function. And we are going to create a hero. Now you might be wondering, well, if we got our params here, how do we create a hero in the request? How we do that is again by accessing the request thing here, but we're not going to use parameters. The really cool thing about Postman in HTTP requests is that you can send something called a body up in the request. And the body takes JSON, if you were here for that part of the lecture. We briefly talked about JSON, and that JSON is going to be parsed into a JavaScript object, which then we can save to our database. So how we access that body is we just do request.body. Okay. Actually, I think I'm going to start, like, just kind of stop right here before doing update and delete, just so you guys can see where we are at. So I'm going to run npm start again. And I already got a few of these ready to go. Oh, wait, I forgot to do this again, because this is important. We need the heroes router. We're going to call it heroes. It's going to use the heroes router. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So we're going to send a request, and as you can see, we just have an empty array. We can't really get an ID back right now because we have nothing in our array. Nothing would be returned. So we got to create something. So what you're going to do, if you're following along with Postman, is you're going to change this from a GET request to a POST request. And then you're going to type out all of this information right here. And then once you're done with that, you're going to go over to this body tag right here in Postman. Then if you click it, you can see that there's some data here. There's some JSON. So we are sending a ID of some kind, the level, the name of the hero, and the class. But you can really send up any data that you want with this, because we're not really doing any validation. The only thing that you do need if you send any of this up is the ID, because that's what we use to query when we get an ID or when we get a specific resource. So if we send this, it should send. Oh, wait. This won't send. It won't send because I didn't say that it was done sending. So I need to send status like we did in the status router and return a 201. So now if we send it, there we go. It says it's created, but you should never just trust status codes because it says created. You should always test it to make sure the data is actually there. So if we test it, oh, it's null. Why is it null? See why it's null. It shouldn't be null. Okay, why is this undefined? Oh yeah. Okay, so that comes into this last dependency right here. I completely forgot to make a note of this, but you need to have this dependency right here if you are using JavaScript and Express. This is because Express by itself doesn't know how to parse this JSON when it sends up in a body. Now, if you use other frameworks like Spring Boot for Java, for instance, I think that's already built in, but for some reason, Express it isn't. So we have to set this up real quick. And we'll do that at the index.json, or I keep saying JSON, index.javascript file. And how you use that package is by typing app.use. You have to require body parser first. Okay, and then we're going to say it's going to use body parser dot URL encoded and false. I don't know what any of these options do. This is just what the package README says that you have to type in order to use JSON as the body. So I'll leave that up for just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so now we should actually have it. So if I make this post thing again, yeah, you can see that we actually have our data now, which is good, and it's not undefined or null. And that means if we go to our GET request, we should get our data. If we go to the specific route, which gets the ID of 1, we should get our specific one. Okay, so we have get post, but we still have two other HTTP methods left. We have patch and delete. So we'll implement patch first, and patch is going to take an ID like we did in our get route. It's going to take a callback function. And what we're going to do is we are going to call update hero like we did before, and access the parameters like we did before, and the body like we did before. And then we're going to send our status like we did in the status router. And then for our delete request, we are just going to pass in an ID. call our delete hero method. And we're going to send a status like we did before of 204. All right, so if we restart this, we'll have to send up another post request, because the one downside of using a kind of in-memory fake database like this with an array, we don't actually save this array anywhere. So it will restart every single time as an empty array, which is why you should always kind of interfaces with a database. But that's it always ends up being a little bit too much to do APIs and databases in the same workshop, or at least that's my experience. Yeah, so we created the hero and it's actually created. So what we're going to do is now we're going to update it. So again, if you go to Postman and you click this drop down and go to patch, is patch, right? Yeah, patch. And then go to body again, click raw in JSON, and then give it some more random data, like I don't know, maybe they just changed all of a sudden from a rogue to a fighter and they drop like 45 levels. Oh, then yeah, then we should, it says it's updated. So then we should be able to get an individual one back. As you can see, it's now updated. And you can see that we don't have a duplicate data entry. Okay. And then the last thing that we have to test is the delete method. Again, just go down to this drop down, click delete, type out all of the localhost information like this, and of course give it the ID of 1. If we send it, it says that it was deleted, all fine and dandy. If we try to get all of our stuff back, as you can see, it's deleted. Okay, so I think that's the end of the stuff that I had prepared. Where is the hero data coming from in this example? Could you be more specific? Like the data that I'm sending here. Okay, so if I create a new request, I'll just type it out like this. That's our base route for our API, and I changed it to a post request. If I go to heroes, which is where our router is defined, then what you want to do is you want to go to body, which is right below this, this entry right here. And it's going to say none when you first start it, but what you want to do is you want to switch it to raw. And then instead of text, you want to go down to JSON. And then how you write JSON. I also had these already written up to save time, but yeah, I should definitely go through this example. So thank you for saying that. Yeah, and then you would just define everything like this. Like if we wanted to have a hero ID of 2, and I don't know, somebody give me a name for this hero. Okay. We'll make Homelander, I don't know, we'll do a rogue, or not rogue, we'll do a wizard, because why not? We'll do level, says it's created, so if I go here, it's right here. JSON does take a little bit getting used to, because it It is very strictly typed, which is kind of funny because JavaScript is not strictly typed. JSON follows a very specific format where you have to define whatever fields as a string, and then anything after it can be an array or an object or a Boolean or whatever. And it has to include these commas, or else you'll get errors. But yeah, just to kind of wrap up though, there's a lot that I left out, and I think it's because it would be good for you guys to play with this if oh, thank you. I never watched The Boys, but I did see who's that famous YouTuber? Michael Reeves. He posted a video ad about The Boys, and it's really funny. Yeah, if you guys haven't watched Michael Reeves, please watch him. He's amazing. Okay, but the last thing that that I wanted to touch, just so you guys can kind of like expand upon this, either in a different language or on this example or whatever, I didn't do any validation, as I kind of touched upon. So that means I could have just a ID being sent to the database like this, and it would save, which is pretty bad for an API. So one of the things that you want to make sure and look out for when you make these databases is checking for that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I'll be around after. This lecture will be on our YouTube channel. We'll post a link on the Discord and in the Slack.